of distance separating us in real time. That's kind of mind-boggling. It's I mean, we take it for granted that it's normal now, but it's not normal really.
Yeah. And I take it as probably the only bright side of COVID, that it opened our minds, our eyes, that there are other things to be done, use technology, in a positive way. So before, as a coordinator of the Arabic Studies program, like we invite guest speakers, and it's always, you have to fly them in,
oh goodness,
they should be in person, all the budget, the expenses, they're free, they're not free. Now I can ask people to Zoom to my classroom.
I know, it's amazing.
Right?
So I had this, it occurred to me a while ago, and we're live, by the way, but I'll introduce you shortly. But no, it occurred to me a few years ago that, why can't we, instead of spending thousands of dollars in these in-person conferences, just so 5 people can listen to my paper, right? Like, why can't we do this stuff online? Like, I mean, it seemed like a no-brainer to me, and I suggested this to a few friends and academic friends. They're like, no, it's people like the in-person thing, but it's just it doesn't make any sense. And the online model is just it's so more interesting, I think. I mean, we should never do away with the in-person contact ultimately, but to facilitate the, if it is truly about sharing knowledge, right? The great thing about doing stuff online is potentially, I mean, the entire world could potentially be exposed to one's ideas.
And you can do more. So instead of inviting one guest speaker, one event a year, right? I'm planning now for a course, Global Islam Current Debates, where every class someone will be Zooming from around the globe, will be Zooming to my classroom. I mean, my students are lucky, they don't get to listen just to one professor, we get this tendency sometimes to repeat what we say and all of that. They will get to see what people believe in from all around the globe. And sometimes, it's more even more realistic, because we're going to have people with different and sometimes the opposite points of view defending their views, all in our classroom. So, a lot of opportunities. As I said, it's probably the only bright side we had from COVID. And I'm talking to you now,
Well, no, exactly. Well, it's amazing. So, what I'll do is I'll quickly introduce you, Professor Abla Hasan. Our wonderful guest today is Abla Hasan, who is Associate Professor of Practice of Arabic Language and Culture. She holds a PhD in the Philosophy of Language from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And holds also an MA in philosophy as a Fulbright grantee from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Professor Hasan is a native speaker of Arabic. She teaches Arabic language and culture and is the program's undergraduate advisor and coordinator. Her teaching and research focus is on Quranic studies, Islamic feminism, women and gender studies, and Arabic studies. And Professor Hasan's most recent book, published by Lexington, is called Decoding the Egalitarianism of the Qur'an, Retrieving Lost Voices on Gender. So if we may start, Professor Hasan, by talking a little bit about the very problematic that's set up in the title itself, egalitarianism in the Quran. So the assumption that I guess one is making is the Quran perhaps suggests with a superficial reading a non-egalitarian sort of ethics. So could you speak a little bit to that, how you address that problematic?
Right. Thank you for the conversation and for inviting me. And yes, from the title, the bigger question I would say of the book was to go back to the Quran, to understand what is the Quran and what does the Quran say about women-related issues, questions related to gender egalitarianism, right? And with the questions, two different sets of questions. Questions from inside the faith, pending questions, I would say, and the questions from the curious outsider. And probably here I'm speaking from my experience as a veiled Muslim woman. I've been living in the US for almost 14 years. So a lot of like I would say 80% of questions when I teach about Islam, when I am involved in interfaith work, is about women all the time, and for a good reason. We have a lot of pending questions, and it's not only questions from outsiders. They have the right to know about the real status of women in the Quran. It's theological questions per se, I would say, because here's the big question: is God biased or is he just, right? Because there is no way we can keep recycling the old answers to get anything new from them. Old answers, and I mean by that traditional answers, even from within or from inside the faith, unfortunately, I would say, to be very open about it, stopped working a long time ago. And the question is, where should we go to find answers then, right? Are women and men equal? Do we have gender-based superiority, which is called qiwama, right? What about domestic violence, right? Is it seriously the case that men are advised to correct their wives by appealing to beating them, to physical abuse and psychological abuse? Many attempts, were offered to deal with all of that. What about polygamy and drowning women in second marriages? What about women's right to public authority positions? What about minor marriage? What about our cultural practices that we changed into religion and we started preaching for them as religion? Should we go back to the Quran for these answers, or is it an obsolete old book that was revealed for its time and people? And it's problematic because we can't go with that route. Because according to the Islamic claim, which is a very brave claim, and I would say all Islamic schools believe in that, Islam is a universal religion. Islam is a good religion fit for the needs of all people, all times, all cultures, because it's general enough to do all of that, right? And from my reading that and my research that I provide in this book and in papers and in presentations like this, I find answers in the Quran. It's just having an open mind and approach, a new approach sometimes, and go to the language, study the language very carefully. Many answers we take for granted that, yes, this is the answer because someone said that, and we have support from someone said that. And I mean by that, Salaf, right? The ancestors, like the golden times. But many of these answers can't work for our times. The approach I adopt is because you have to adopt a methodology at the end of the day. You can't keep jumping between methodologies and claim that everything is working. My approach is based on tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, using the Quran to interpret the Quran. And I don't take it as an exclusive approach to dealing with these problems, but I take it as maybe a methodology that adds to others' methodologies and complements them. And when you do something, Hassan, and you find results, you find answers. So the question is why not? And this is not really something that's new. We know in the history of exegesis, of Islamic exegesis and tafsir, the ulum of tafsir, the sciences of tafsir, we had two main schools. We had a tafsir bil-ma'thur school and a tafsir bil-ra'i school. Tafsir bil-ma'thur, which depends on heritage-based interpretation of the Quran, and the tafsir bil-ra'i, which is intellectual analysis, your own opinion-based. And they were never, on the same page. There was always that competition between the two schools. A tafsir bil-Quran, using the Quran to decode the Quran, I take it as a safe route because I can claim to be more objective in my answers. Let me try to take, for example, the Quranic word as a key to understand that same term, that same word when it occurs, when it takes place in the Quran. And from my attempt to deal, I would say, the top most controversial questions concerning women issues in the Quran, I find answers within the Quran itself. And maybe we can go over some examples from problematic issues, and we have a lot of them, unfortunately, when it comes to women's issues in Islam. You're muted, Hassan.
There we go. Sorry about that. So before maybe we go into specific examples, it occurs to me, this is not my area of expertise, but the little that I know and have been exposed to, I believe it was Amina Wadud. I remember hearing that she said, based on her studies of the Quran, that she had to come to the very painful conclusion that the Quran is patriarchal, that God is patriarchal, and what would your response be to that, to Amina Wadud's position?
You can't really do any feminist reading of the Quran without starting with Amina Wadud, right? With the great Professor Amina Wadud. I'm a big fan of Amina Wadud. Now, patriarchy. I see patriarchy in the way the religion was processed. I don't see patriarchy in the text itself, because this will be a huge theological dilemma, I would say. If God, is God in the meaning we understand by God, at least in the monotheistic tradition, in the Abrahamic tradition, God should be fair, just, and good to everyone. And this is what the text says. The text is gender egalitarianism. The text is humanitarian, but processing the text deviated away from that. I don't want to be misunderstood as scandalizing what medieval scholars did, right? They did the best according to their time. And there is a way that we as human beings, it's not a secret, we control, or people in power, let's say, control production, including intellectual production. So the arguments were understood in a way that will give advantage to the elite, including the male elite. It's natural outcome of having a complete absence of female voices, right? Give me names of mufassirat of the Quran. I know that a lot of hadith goes back to Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, but if we just try to count the number of who processed, who was in control, in charge of jurisprudence, tafsir, the everyday fatwa, I would say the female voices were absent. And the question is, were women silent, or were they silenced by others? And this is not exclusive, unique to women. Anyone in power would fund, maybe it's until today, right? You need some kind of support to your views to be out there, right? We speak all the time about the consensus of the nation, ijma. What do we mean by ijma? Ijma, I would take it as like an imaginary notion. There is no way you can have all, even let's take a globally or the most important conference on religious studies. You can't really claim that all people agreed on the same opinion. There are other voices, marginalized, maybe silenced, maybe people were not that comfortable with saying their views. We had in our short conversation before we started being on live, that gap between academia and between the public, between having views and debating these views between each other as scholars, and between reaching audience And therefore, many times it's, it's the platform you use for your views to reach out to the audience. It's not only the ideas or the views themselves or the way you put them. Sometimes it's the freedom of speech. It's having the right to have a voice in the first place. So a lot of issues, I don't see any of these issues really essentially embodied in the religious text. And I can speak for the Quran because my methodology depends on, it's a hermeneutical approach to the Quran. So I start from the Arabic language. I can go back to really rethinking the Arabic language, but I can extend the argument to say that all religious texts are gender egalitarian and humanitarian. Now, I don't like to step on others' territories. I leave, when it comes to biblical studies, to experts in biblical studies, but I would highly doubt that you can see misogyny essentially in any religious text, soundly, in any religious text. It's our interpretation of the text per se. It's not the text. It's because here's the thing. I'm going to speak about the Quran. According to the Islamic belief, Muslims believe that the Quran was revealed literally by the angel Gabriel to Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad didn't really think things in his mind and put them or narrate them to his followers. Prophet Muhammad was not the author of the Quran. He was a messenger. He conveyed a message, and the message is from God. And to get a message from God with flaws, this is a theological problem, and therefore a question about whether Quran is gender egalitarian or not is a question about God himself, because this is a book, excuse the very loose way of putting it, authored by God himself or revealed by God himself. It's not the product of a prophet who authored things 14 centuries ago. And again, with the claim that I just mentioned, that the Quranic message, the Islamic message, although I make distinction between both now, is in itself is good enough to move with the humanity until the end of all times, because it's general enough to allow that. When we see sexist norms, misogynist norms, when we see things that don't add up, then the problem is in our interpretation. It's not in the text itself. If we just give the text a second chance, just, read it carefully, leave aside all the readings, leave aside all the instruction, because we go to schools, to madrasas, right? To theological institutions that many times try to push us into, this is the way you do this. You don't come up with an opinion if not supported by this imam saying that or that professor saying that. So you can't come really up with something new. But I would say if those imams who we take them as idols were alive today, they were blessed, rethinking the Quran and following in their profession and doing what they did, because this is really their legacy. And I add to that, Hassan, the simple fact that from reading the Quran is a book that recommends, encourages you or the reader to reflect, tafakkur, to rethink, and tafakkur comes from it's mubalagha, exaggeration, which means you think, you rethink, you come back to it, you revisit the text times and times again. No wonder, because every generation needs to find their needs there. So I can't really go back to someone who said something, an opinion, which was valuable at their time, 14 centuries ago, quote that opinion and apply it to my time. It's not the intention of the Quran itself. And therefore, the Quran speaks a very, very general language with no specific recommendations or rulings of any kind. I remember I tried so many times to count how many times the Quran in a way or another encourages thinking and tafakkur. Because I like sometimes to do things myself, ulul albab, people with intellect, reflect, or shaming people who don't reflect, or shaming people who just say things that we believe in what our ancestors believe, things like that. Literally, Hassan, I keep losing the count. So if you read a book, if I hand you a book, and please excuse the shallow here analogy, and this book says, for example, a book on healthy lifestyle. Let's say the book says drink water, drink water, drink water, right? And if you give me back the book without reaching the conclusion that you need to drink more water, or without at least saying that this book recommends drinking water, you didn't understand anything of that book. Unfortunately, this is the case with traditional processing of the Quran. People are encouraged to read the Quran. People, Ramadan time, people even brag about how many times they were able to do khitma or finish reading the Quran. But unfortunately, and I'm very sad to say that, very few would recommend, would consider, what did I learn from reading the Quran? What's the new thing that I'm learning today from reading it for the second time, for the third time, for the fourth time, and so on. So there's a huge responsibility. And I don't mean by that all of us should be scholars and go and interpret the Quran, but as a personal guidance for your faith, there is something you need to get out of it. And it's a personal responsibility as well. If you need to have it as a lived experience in your life, if you just want to depend on others' opinions, good luck with that. People, do that, but there's no, I would say, there's no excuse, because at the end of the day, there are so many personal challenges, many decisions you need to take in life. And even when you choose not to decide, you will be choosing, or we're choosing all the time. When we say something, we choose to say it. When we don't say something, we choose not to say it. When we have our personal, individual opinion, we choose to go that route. When we take others' opinions, there are so many opinions. Why did you pick that imam or that school or that doctrine? Because you're choosing again. So no one can set themselves free from the responsibility of rethinking the Quran and, just do the homework, read the Quran for yourself and see the impact of it on your life. In my case, a lot of the questions I got through my career is related to women's status in Islam. And to be honest, in answering the questions, I had to answer those questions for myself first. So I had to go into this journey of digging into the Quran. And it's not something unique to me. So many brave voices are doing that now in the field. So many respectful colleagues are doing that.
This is so incredible. Thank you so much. So much to unpack there. I mean, I'm not going to spend too much time unpacking these things myself, but one of the things you mentioned, and this is a kind of very Foucauldian insight, right? That the nature of knowledge production, that knowledge is always inevitably more often than not tied in with power. So to your point about how the consensus was reached, the so-called consensus, I mean, it's not separate from how power has operated through history and continues to operate till now. It's just an inevitable part of that process. Talal Asad talks about this without using a Foucauldian lens, but in his kind of very famous and old essay at this point, which looks at Islam as a discursive tradition. He analyzes how orthodoxy is established and the nature in which it's always inevitably tied in with power. And then with time, very often what happens is what was maybe historically at one point the orthodox position, which became the orthodox position through its kind of imposition, then there comes about a shift just in the nature of things. But then a new orthodoxy is established, and then that new orthodoxy is implemented through processes of power. So the question then becomes, to your point, Professor Hasan, is which voices are being left out as orthodoxy kind of crystallizes and solidifies, right, in each sort of period, orthodoxy, in quotation marks, because let's say a Sunni, loosely said, understood as Sunni orthodoxy is different from a Shi'i orthodoxy, which is different from, other things, other types of orthodoxies. And, what gets classed as heterodox, right, is also a very much an exercise in power, right? So, an example, a very powerful, I think, example of this, say, in the Sufi context, is that of Sheikh al-Akbar Ibn Arabi, who gets classed as heterodox in his own time, right, in his own lifetime, and he's persecuted and so forth, and who's of course buried in Damascus himself, and in this incredibly sort of powerful luminary sort of thinker who impacts Islamic thought irrevocably, in particular sort of Islamic metaphysics irrevocably. But then, he holds this very bizarre distinction of both being considered Sheikh al-Akbar by many, and by many others as being considered like the greatest sort of heretic, right? So, which is a very bizarre phenomenon. But the point, I guess, to your point is, how does orthodoxy come about? How when orthodoxy is kind of solidified, which are the voices that are marginalized? Where are the women voices? Absolutely, in Islamic history. I mean, women throughout history have represented more or less 50% of the human population, not least the Muslim human population. Why are there not more women voices? So if men, which has been the case primarily, and men are speaking and writing and sort of giving their pronouncements on different things through much of Muslim history, then to what extent realistically can these men, even if they're the most pious and caring and compassionate human beings, realistically to what extent can they really be speaking with what's the word, not authenticity, but like, how can we really take the voices seriously when it comes to speaking just on women's issues, right? Exactly. I mean, and women's voices are so important throughout human history, and I strongly believe more so perhaps today than ever before, only because there's this hyper masculinization of human society, and the sort of the feminine voice, which isn't only coming from women, or doesn't only come from women, but I think it comes significantly from and through women, is so important. So your corrective is a really, really important corrective. And I wanted to ask you about one of the chapters in your book where you look at, and you'll sort of inform me some more, but I remember reading some years ago in one of Frithjof Schuon's short essays on the prophethood of Mary, how historically many scholars considered her to be a prophet. Not all of them, this is not a universal position, but many did, and which is a remarkable, I think, corrective and perspective to hold, because very often the mainstream understanding is, oh, well, only men can be prophets because, men, whatever, they don't menstruate, or some, terrible argument like that. But whereas, I mean, and please, suke a little bit to this incredibly important figure in human history as such, not least in the Islamic tradition, but of course in Christianity. I mean, she's this, Maryam al-Islam is this incredibly luminous, pious, powerful figure through whom, of course, the Prophet Jesus, from an Islamic point of view, Christ from Christian point of view, comes into the world. So it's not a small thing. She's
right.
A little bit to
and maybe, Hassan, it's sufficient to add that the only woman mentioned in name in the Quran is Mary, Maryam, the mother of Jesus. And we know from the Quran style that very few people are mentioned, very few of them are mentioned in name. And not only she mentioned by name, we have a full chapter devoted for Mary, chapter 19, and to her story. The question whether we can find a Quranic argument for the prophethood of Mary or not is a big question when it comes to gender egalitarianism, because if women can be prophets just like men, it means there's nothing in nature, there's nothing in their nature that prevents them from being perfect or complete. According to the Islamic tradition, all prophets are the best role models for humanity. They're infallible. They're perfect in their acts. They're still human beings. We're not speaking about any divinity involved there, but you can take them as a role model. So excluding women from that will, and which happened in the Islamic tradition, was for excuses like she can't be strong enough, she can't be in control, in charge, and it's such a huge responsibility. And many times, because she's not pure enough, women are not pure enough for that high rank. And out of all the scholars, I give credit to Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi, who argued that not only Mary, but the mother of Moses, and the mother of Isaac as well, they were prophets. Because what would count, logically speaking, for someone to be a prophet other than getting divine communication through angels or even without angels? And Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi argued that those women had that in their lives. So why not to argue for them as prophets? Al-Qurtubi had a similar opinion, but the consensus, I would say, of everyone else was that women can't be prophets. And there is a difference I'd like to make here between being a prophet, Nabi, and being a messenger, Rasul. So those women are prophets in the meaning that they received revelation. Whether they're messengers or not, this is a different point, which is you're sent to your people in a mission. Maybe the norms of the time, they didn't allow for that. When it comes to Mary's prophethood, I find, in addition to the logical evidence that she was a prophet, I found from analyzing one particular verse that maybe I shared that in my book as well, that I can share with you quickly, from the repetition and from rethinking the repetition in one verse, some clues to add to what I call the logical evidence for Mary's prophethood, which means we can say that Mary is a prophet according to the Quran because of linguistic evidence and because of the logical evidence. And the verse is in chapter 3, 42, 43. I'm gonna just this one maybe read quickly. And mention when the angel said, "O Mary, indeed Allah has chosen you and purified you and chosen you above the women of the worlds." And the bigger question is about the repetition in the Quranic language for the expression "has chosen you." Let's notice it's chosen you and purified you and chosen you. It's not then. So we don't have any chronological order. We have two types of choosing Mary. And I'm not the first one who thought there's something about this repetition. A lot of exegetes out there tried to rethink it, but with no one saying that it can lead to an argument in favor of Mary's prophethood, for a reason, because they excluded that even as an option. So even before starting the analysis, they didn't go with that route because it can't be, right? So the question is, why to repeat has it chosen you? Repetition is not something for no meaning. is not something, or for no reason, or for no sound reason, is not something we should allow ourselves to conclude to in a miraculous language, in a perfect language like the language of the Quran. Muslims argue for the Quran as the perfect, way or style of writing. Even the computer, when we write something and, it's repeated, the computer rejects the repetition for no reason. So why to accept here the repetition for no reason? Some exegetes try things like, okay, there is a repetition, and here maybe I can quote a Sha'rawi, the famous Egyptian exegete and mufassir. He said, has it chosen you the first time it was mentioned? It is something Mary shares with others. Has it chosen you above the women of the world? The second time it's mentioned, it's exclusive to Mary, right? Because Mary is the only woman who's going to conceive without a male partner. She's the best of all women, hands down, all times, all places. But now Sha'rawi acknowledges that the first type of choosing Mary is something she shares with others. And who are those others? Who are the chosen people? Prophets. But he couldn't really go with that conclusion. Again, because it's out of discussion. Women can't be prophets. Others tried to say that the first time she was chosen, maybe earlier in her lifetime. The second type of choosing her later in her lifetime. Again, I don't have thumma in Arabic. I don't have the conjunction then. I have wa, which means and. So to be a little bit more careful with dealing with the language itself, there is no way other than saying, this is my understanding of it, other than saying that Mary was chosen not only once, she was chosen twice. First, she was chosen the same way like all other prophets are chosen. She's not superior to any male prophet. She's not inferior than any male prophet. Then the second time, and this is loose in the Quran, Allah has chosen you, not above anyone, right? She's chosen the same way everyone are chosen, and purified you and chosen you above the women of the world. Now we can say from the second time, the expression is mentioned, Mary is the best of all women. She's the best of all women, all times, all places, according to the Quran. Something also deserves to be noticed, the purification, right? And the purified you. The purification comes second to the first way she was chosen, to enable her to conceive in a divine way with no male partner and to be the mother of Jesus, which is a miracle, right? In other words, what I want to say, Mary was not purified to be able to be a prophet, because that should have taken place before the first time she was chosen. She was equally, she was initially, I would say, qualified to become a prophet, like every and all male prophets, without any purification needed for her nature as a woman to be able to be in that high rank. She needed purification, and I have no idea what that kind of divine purification is, to be able to conceive of Jesus with no male partner, which is a divine way that we can say very little about. We should be humble at some times and say only things we can understand. And this is one of these things. So this is what I call the linguistic evidence we can find in the Quran for the prophethood of Mary. And we can easily add to that the logical evidence for Mary as a prophet. Because what makes someone qualified to be a prophet? It's communication with angels. We have in the Quran a documentation of angels bringing Mary the good tidings that she's going to conceive of Jesus with no male partner, and he's going to be named after her. So she had a communication herself with angels, and she communicated with, guess who? With angel Gabriel himself, the angel of revelation. So if she communicated with angel Gabriel, and he's the angel of revelation who communicated, according to the tradition, with Muhammad, so why not to say she's a prophet herself? Finally, we can add to that witnessing miracles in her own life. Because also we know that what makes someone a prophet is working miracles and witnessing miracles. We know from the Quran that in her early life, every time Zechariah entered the place where she was, she used to isolate herself for worship, there was something about a food provided for Mary in a mysterious way, right? Some exegetes, she didn't have to go seek food or do something, right? She was provided food. And we know that because in the Quran, Zechariah asked, Anna laki hada, or something like that. He asked with surprise, right? Where did you get this food from? Some exegetes even said, and I don't like to add details when we don't have Quranic support for that, but I'm going to say it anyway, that she was provided the fruit of winter during summer season, fruit of summer during winter season, things, miraculous things like that. But I take the miracle, not what she was provided, but how she was provided. You're in isolation and you're provided food probably by angels themselves. Zechariah is surprised. He's the one who's providing for her food. He goes to check on her and she's already good. She's already provided food. So this is a miracle she witnessed in her life as well. And the bigger question is, if we have linguistic evidence for Mary as a chosen human being, I would say, in a gender egalitarian tune, and if we have proofs that, Quranic proofs that she communicated with angels, she had a dialogue with angels, she had a dialogue with Angel Gabriel himself, the angel of revelation, and she had her own miracles. So why not to argue for Mary as a prophet equal to all male prophets?
Thank you again for that beautiful.
A long answer to your question, Hassan.
No, it's perfect. No, it's because it's a very important topic. And to your last point, I mean, the way you phrase it, why not? Now, why not accept her as a prophet? Like, I mean, to my mind, the only reason why people would be against accepting the prophethood of the blessed, from a Christian point of view, the blessed, even in Islamic context, Mary, is a patriarchal attitude. That's the only reason that I can think of, really. If we really boil it down, yeah, women are just not as good as men. They're just not the equivalent of men. Yeah. Therefore, they can't be prophets. Sorry, they're kind of lesser human beings.
It's not even an option. And I don't see patriarchy only as the only way of arresting the text. The text can be arrested by anyone who's in power for their own agendas. For example, for political agendas. During the times where the Islamic empire was expanding, do you think people were in favor, or let's say people in power would encourage exegetes who will come with humanitarian messages and ending slavery messages and freedom of religion messages and all people are equal and you can't really use religion as a way to support the expanding empire? So there are so many ways that people in power can use their power to force their own interpretations, or at least to support, to fund, to encourage their own interpretations. And this will bring us, Hassan, to another challenge. Are we doing the same now, right? Because maybe I'm trying, as a feminist Muslim scholar, I'm trying to replace patriarchal interpretations by feminist interpretations. Why not, right? Maybe we're trying to, since now we live in open societies, interfaith societies, we have colleagues from other faith or no faith that we love and we respect. Maybe we want to replace the strict message, religious message, by freedom of religion message, right? And it's a bigger question that we need to ask ourselves, and we need to be honest with ourselves. And I see there is no way, at least, my humble attempt to do that, of setting myself free from myself without going back to the text. If I allow the text to speak for itself and I mute my voice, I mute my desires, I don't want to replace patriarchy or male-centered interpretations by female-centered interpretations, right? I don't want to be involved in doing that. And who knows, maybe this is a human tendency. Maybe all of us can be motivated in a point or another to do that. And therefore,
I think this is an important, sorry to interrupt, but I think this is an important point that you raise, because say, from a certain perspective, let's say a neo-traditionalist perspective or what have you, say neo-traditionalists would say, oh, well, you're just, I mean, this kind of perspective that you're presenting is just part of the liberal Western agenda. Here we go again. You know, this is how they undermine the religion. They kind of, you know, so your point is a very important one, which is, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying you're not interested in replacing a patriarchal interpretation by a feminist interpretation per se, but like allowing the text to speak and being very cognizant of our own situatedness, our own lenses, because the Quran, as far as our experience of the Quran as a living text, is a living text because we live through it, right? We interpret it depending on where we're coming from, inevitably, right? And if we can make it work better for us, then all the more power. I mean, there isn't, I mean, the sort of simplistic, let's say, Salafist, or, you know, literalist understanding of things as well. The Quran is just one, you know, it has an obvious meaning, that, and whatever it says, it is, right? And that's as far as it goes. But even that is an interpretation. I mean, we forget, so we're always inevitably, and to some of the things that you were mentioning earlier on in our discussion today, about the situatedness of the Quran, I'm losing my train of thought here, but I've totally lost my train of thought. Forgive me. Yes, please.
Let me go back to something very important you mentioned, like with the accusations you mentioned that here we go, brainwashed scholars, you know, Western educated scholars, feminists again. You know, we keep getting those kinds of accusations, you know, beyond what you can imagine. And people has the reason to raise those doubts. I have the reason to raise this doubt, whether I'm doing what I criticize the medieval scholars for doing. They applied their knowledge to the text, right? Are we doing that or not? And therefore, I see it as the most safe route is to follow the text, to allow the text to speak for itself, whether we like what we read in the text or not. And I'm saying this loosely because from my experience dealing with the text very carefully, all projections or patriarchal projections are just human projections on the text. The text is free from those kinds of, I would say, male-centered projections or political projections. For example, when it comes to arguing for slavery as a Quranic thing, or arguing for Islam as the only religion as a Quranic thing, right? Arguing against others, the freedom of belief as a Quranic thing. Those arguments are not Quranic. Those arguments were shaped, were made, you know, by people who try to process the text. I apply a methodology that I refer to, or the what inspires it, what I call the semantic completeness of the Quranic language. And it's a very strict application of tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, interpreting the Quran by using the Quran, which I don't allow myself, you know, in the book, and I have another book, inshallah, coming soon in October with Lexington. I like those guys, so I keep working with them. The same methodology. Now I lost my train of thoughts. I keep applying this methodology for answers from the Quran to be as objective as we can be as possible, because at the end of the day, we're human beings trying to understand the divine. God doesn't speak personally to any of us, right? When we say قال الله تعالى, God said, this is what we believe God said or God meant, right? The problems, the gap between the text and our understanding of the text is a real thing. It's there. It's going to be always there. So how about if I, set aside my, my personal, my biased, maybe needs, agendas, desires, requirements, and I listen to the text. How about if I take one word and I try to find it in the rest of the Quran and I come back to it? Maybe that will set us free from more damage to the Quran or to any religious text by imposing ourselves as the divine. We're not divine. No one of us is divine. We're just having different attempts to understand the divine. And maybe by appealing to the Quran, reading the Quran from within the Quran, maybe we'll have a better chance and less set of problems. For sure, I would say less set of problems.
Well, what you've sort of outlined, that sort of ethic as far as our reading of the Quran, our interpretation of the Quran, it strikes me as, eminently intelligent and fair and also very humble. Like, and what I appreciate is if we maintain not a degree, but we have to maintain degrees of humility. I mean, always to the best of our ability, but especially when we're engaging with a text, which as Muslims we believe is literally God's speech itself, then we must always be humble and say, this is the best that we can do. And I think this is in keeping, what you're saying is eminently, strikes me as eminently humble and true to the Islamic ethos. And that very attitude of humility, if we apply it through history, like if neo-traditionalists are saying, well, these things, like say the Hamza Yusufs of the world, right? They'll say, well, all this stuff has been discussed already. Really? All this stuff has been discussed. Nothing new needs to be discussed. That sort of attitude. I mentioned him just because, he's, a big representative of, let's say, the neo-traditionalist school. Then that's not being humble anymore, as far as, would the scholars that we cite as these timeless examples, and the way you put it earlier, which I thought was very profound, that a lot of these imams, historically speaking, we have a tendency, many of us have a tendency of idolizing them. Mm-hmm. Would they themselves have been comfortable with this degree of codification of their texts? I mean, I would argue not, certainly not. In keeping with my kind of attitude, for what it's worth, I mean, there's a complex I have a complex personal history as to why this has come about, but I really believe, and part of that history, which I can mention, is throughout my life, some of my greatest teachers have been women. Not that only, and not to say that I haven't had great male teachers, but honestly, some of the greatest teachers I've had have been women. And I really don't think that's accidental. I really believe fundamentally, not to be so, not to make some highfalutin claim here. This is genuinely my existential kind of belief and feeling that women have something deeply wise and compassionate and humble to offer us as a species, not least as Muslims, and speaking, continuing in that vein, as it were, about learning from women teachers like yourself. We have the issue, and we spoke earlier about Mary, and her role in the Quranic narrative and through human history as a result. You mentioned the example of Queen Sheba and the idea, and not just the idea from a Quranic narrative point of view, the reality of having leaders who are women. And so could you speak a little bit to that, please?
Yeah, the Queen of Sheba. I teach women in the Quran for Nebraska University, and every time I teach this course, my students share with me that their favorite character was the Queen of Sheba. And when it comes to her story, the Quran describes stories, Quranic stories, as ahsan al-qasas, the best of stories. And the Quranic stories are the best stories, not because, of course, there's this miraculous linguistic style of the Quran, but there's also the lessons and morals you can learn from this story. So the big lesson out of the other lessons one can learn from a celebrated queen in the Quran is women's right to public authority positions with no conditions of any kind. The way the Quran introduced the Queen of Sheba with a huge respect, her personality as a leader, she's an equal of Prophet Solomon himself. And this is, I find, as a linguistic evidence in the Quran to the full gender egalitarianism for men and women as leaders. In the same chapter, Prophet Solomon describes himself, and we know Prophet Solomon is, and this is chapter 27, Prophet Solomon is a mighty king and a mighty prophet in the Quran. And he's given powers, he's given wisdom, he's given even supernatural powers. We know of communicating with demons, with jinn, with the wind, with animals, with everything. So he praises himself and his family as people who have been given a share of everything. Utina min kulli shay. When the hupu, the story starts with Solomon in his court, surrounded by his servants, animals, demons, human beings. And the hupu, the cute bird, comes back with the news, something fascinating. I found some news for you. There is a queen, and he would describe her the same exact way Solomon describes himself in the Quran, as someone who has been given a share of everything, right? A clear gender egalitarian message. Now, unfortunately, you see the same exegetes when they go interpret the same chapter, the same expression, they would say that, yeah, Solomon was given of everything. He was given prophethood, he was given wisdom, he was given leadership qualities, he was given personality. When they interpret the same impression, she was given a share of everything as applied to the Queen of Sheba. Yeah, she was given a throne, soldiers, material stuff, nothing about her personality, nothing about the Queen of Sheba as a leader. Not only as a leader, she's equal to King Solomon and Prophet Solomon himself. The only reason the Hupu was criticizing her is because they were in the habit of worshiping, we know, the sun instead of worshiping God. Even as the story goes, the way she's responding to the letter from Prophet Solomon, the way she's consulting a male counselor, the way she's responding to their offer of, we're people of military power, they said, but she resorted instead to her feminine smartness and wisdom and to her experience as a leader. And she said, I'm going to send him a gift. Let me try this, diplomacy, right? I'm going to send him a gift. And clearly, she was trying to know his intention. Is he a king interested in money, in gifts, in maybe adding properties to his properties? Or is he, as he's claiming, he's preaching for a new religion? He started his letter to her in the name of God, and she described his letter as a gracious letter, right? She sensed there's something there. And of course, Prophet Solomon got angry and rejected the gift. What you're doing here, right? As she expected. We know that it ended with the Queen of Sheba visiting his palace, his challenging her, performing miracles, and deceiving her. And she ended by converting or acknowledging monotheism, acknowledging the only God of Solomon. But there's another lesson there, that what really worked for her is to be deceived by Solomon, probably because she was very clever, very smart, and it was very hard to anyone to deceive her. So when he tricked her, with working miracles, she acknowledged he must be aided with supernatural powers. The other big lesson, and I can't, leave the story without mentioning as well. We mentioned so far, Hassan, Mary, and we mentioned the Queen of Sheba. The Queen of Sheba and Solomon, we're speaking about a Jewish lady, right? Solomon is a Jewish prophet. And Mary, you can say she's Christian, or if you want to take Jesus as a Jewish rabbi, you can say she's Jewish as well. So the role models for Muslim women are a Jewish lady and a Christian lady, again, back to the big shared human, monotheistic, Abrahamic shared legacy that the Quran is celebrating, which is, we speak about patriarchy, sometimes narrowing also by medieval needs and agendas, narrowing the Abrahamic mission in the Quran to those who follow Muhammad, or the monotheistic religion to those who follow Muhammad as the only Muslims. In the Quran, Muslims are those who follow God, and following Muhammad is an option, Nowhere in the Quran comes to cancel the other Abrahamic or belittle the other Abrahamic traditions. Again, this is another topic. We can't really go there, but this is another lesson that you can learn as well from the two stories, the story of Mary and the story of the Queen of Sheba. Those are role models for Muslim women.
Again, these are very, very powerful stories and very powerful responses from you, for which I'm very, very grateful.
Thank you, Hassan.
No, this is very important. You discuss, I think, your very first chapter. We started by talking about Mary. She appears a little later on in your book, but I think in your first chapter, you discuss the shall we say, historically problematic verse 434. Could you speak a little bit to that, please?
Yeah, and probably on my list on questions I usually get about women's issues in Islam and the Quran, I would say this is on the top of the list.
Oh, I'm sure, yes.
Yeah, and for a sound reason.
Of course, yes.
Can really.
Well, I intentionally didn't want to start there, because not that I'm not interested in your response, but I think, some of the other issues, somehow, to my mind, not to belittle the reality of the abuse of the misinterpretation of this verse, but I mean, the reality of Mary, the reality of the Queen of Sheba, I mean, these examples in some ways speak for themselves, to my mind.
Right,
so I wanted
right. Right, and I appreciate starting with stories and role models before we get into something very serious as a claim of advocating for domestic violence as a Quranic argument, right? Because it's a huge embarrassment. Let's be frank about it. To keep saying that 434 is really, as interpreted, provides men with the 3 correction methods that starts with reproaching women, advising them, and wives, and then escalates into withholding sex as a punishment. And third, it can end with physically striking them. And let me start by saying, Hassan, again, going back to what we started our discussion with, are we here projecting our needs, or is it the text itself, right? So are we having huge embarrassment with understanding 434 because we don't like it, because it doesn't fit our lifestyle, I would say no, because it contradicts the Quran, the rest of the Quran. So the problem with 434 is not that we don't like anymore an argument that wrongs women in marriage. It doesn't fit our lifestyle. No, it contradicts the Quran itself. Either Hassan, the rest of the Quran, the rest of the gender egalitarian message of the Quran is wrong, or our understanding, the traditional understanding of this verse is wrong. Myself, I had, a long time reflecting on it, and I think I have a reasonable case of the 20 arguments I provide for rethinking 434. Long story short, it has nothing to do with marital context, nothing. It's related to criminal punishments, advertising for 3 criminal punishments to be decided by the court to punish violators of laws and rules in the community. It has nothing to do with marriage. Why do you, Abla, argue for that? If we go back to the verse itself, you can tell from the verse, from the language of the verse, there is no mention to any marital context. It depends on time. I can either say it, or I can share a slide with the verse itself. You tell me, because it's more clear if we go to the text itself.
No, please do, yes. So I'm muting myself, therefore I'm a little slow to respond. No, please do, yes.
Okay, so maybe I try to share my screen.
Are you able to share your screen? Wait, do I have to do something?
You have to allow me a permission.
Yes. Wait, sorry. Let me. How do I do that? Multiple participants. Yes. Sorry. Yes. That you should be allowed. You should be able to do it now. Yes.
Okay. It's going to be only one slide.
Cool.
I know PowerPoints can be a little bit distracting.
No, this is perfect.
So you see it now at your side?
Yes.
So this is 434. And here I provide, eventually I replace this translation by my own translation. I provide, this is Abdul Halim's translation, and I'm not providing it to attack it. I depend on Abdul Halim's translation in my research. It's out of the best translations out there. But this is the mainstream understanding of the verse, and this is what we have. And by the way, I can't give myself credit as the only person or the first person who tried to make sense or to resolve the many issues coming from the traditional understanding of 434. All what I'm saying, that to be honest with ourselves, or the attempts, there are good intentions, but they're not really Quranic per se. For example, some argue, and I'm going to give without citing people, forgive me, I'm not going to be saying names. For example, some attempts try to soften the tune of the verse by saying it's light beating, right? It's light beating. It's just beating by using something like miswak, a pen, miswak, or a feather, or something like that. Unfortunately, when you go to the verse, it doesn't say how much the beating takes place, the intensity, how much you repeat it. A very famous line of arguing against the traditional interpretation would say daraba or idrubuhunna, the verb in Arabic, doesn't even mean beating, right? It means to leave them, to ignore them, something like that. Unfortunately, to be very open about it, daraba is, and they draw similarity with the to strike as a root in English. It's not that simple, right? I appreciate the attempt again, because it comes not in the root format. It comes precisely conjugated, like all verbs in Arabic, idribuhunna, in its full conjugation. It's a command due to the conjugation. It's a command given to a group of men to strike an absent group of women, and this is the object. Is it physical beating or striking? Yes, because to ignore or to leave them will require a preposition, daraba an, right? And we don't have that preposition. At least Layla Bukhtiyar, I appreciate her attempt to deal with that. She said that a missing preposition won't count. The Prophet Muhammad, if I'm not misunderstanding her anyway, was illiterate anyway. But again, Hassan, again, with capturing myself, not projecting myself on the text, if I allow myself to say, let me solve this problem by saying that a preposition is missing here, an expression is added there, why to stop with what I like and why not to apply it on all the Quran and eventually change the Quran, right? We can't go there. So it really means physical beating. But the question, what is the subject? What is the subject, right? And I'm going to explain my interpretation, but going over other attempts as well, a better remedy, a final cure, right? To avoid divorce. I always tell my students, I consider my students as my own kids. If your partner, she doesn't respond to you until you beat her, please divorce her, right? This is not marriage as it's described in the Quran, right? This is not ومن آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها. Out of his miracles, loosely translated, he created for you out of yourselves spouses, so you have tranquility. And he divinely provided you a care and love, right? If your spouse drives you to either withhold sex or beat until they're on the same page, please, by appealing to violence, you're not only hurting others, you're hurting your own spirituality. A man who beats a woman is not a man, let alone a man who beats his own wife. The Quran can never, ever recommend that, right? And I should end with that. Even if you deal with daraba doesn't mean to beat. Okay, how do you deal with holding sex as a punishment, marital punishment? Is psychological abuse less harmful than physical abuse? Is indicating that you're not attracted to your wife any better, than beating her? I would say both options, if understood in a marital context, both options are equally bad. So back to the text. Here I do this, this is from my class, in fact. For my students, and I'm so proud of my students, many of them do minor in Arabic studies, so they already read the Arabic and the English. I highlight the same color words in Arabic and the equivalent in English. We start from the beginning. الرجال قوامون على النساء. The very first mistake. الرجال is not husbands. الرجال is men. الرجال is men. They're قوامون, and qawama is another discussion as well, but I take it for another conversation, for another full discussion, as financial responsibility of spending. And nisa, right? Nisa is not wives, and it's not azwaj, it's women. So the second conflict, right? So the relation is not between, or what is coming is not between husbands and wives, it's between men and women. Maybe I can talk a little bit about qawamun. So qawama is the financial responsibility, rewardable financial responsibility of spending on female figures in your family. Your wife can be one of them. بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض, with what God has given some more than others. And I give credit here to Professor Amina Wadoud. بعضهم masculine preferred to بعض masculine, which means qawama is usually understood as men are preferred to women, so masculine to feminine. The language says بعضهم masculine from the subject pronoun to بعض. So there is some men prefer to the rest of men. Who are those category or subcategory of men? بقوامون. How can you be قوام? وبما أنفقوا. They're preferred by God, right? Because it's a religious duty and it's rewardable by God and it's open to you, it's optional. You want to spend, that's fine. You don't want to spend, it's only additional opportunity to get some reward. If you know, I want to give gifts to sisters, aunts, daughters, spend on my wife. Again, it's optional and rewardable. So only the best of men, I would say, Hassan, are the qawamun. They're preferred to the rest of the other men, and they spend. We move with the verse. Righteous wives, right? The third mistake. فَالصَّالِحَاتِ. As-salihat is not righteous wife. As-salihah is righteous woman. Anything, a man or a woman can be righteous. In the Quran, as we read in 21:105 and 72:11, I'm not going to be quoting for saving some time. I'm going to just be giving maybe quick references. Human beings and even demons, jinnis, some of them jinn, can be described as salih. So anyone with righteous behavior is salih. So the verse is not describing righteous wives, it's describing righteous women in the community, right? Qanitat, what is qanita? Devout. Is qanita restricted to wives? Again, no. Mary, we know in the Quran, Mary is not the wife of anyone. It was recommended, it was commanded in the Quran in 3:43, iqnuti, be devout to your God. So righteous women are devout. Then we move, hafizat lil ghayb, and they guard what God would have them guard, right? And hafizat lil ghayb bima hafidallah, in their husband's absence. Another mistake, I don't have any husbands here in the Arabic. I have those who guard what God asked to be guarded when unseen. Al-ghayb is unseen. Unseen by who? Unseen by God, right? I don't have a single mention to husbands, but the traditional interpretation is women or righteous wives, they obey their husbands even when unseen by their husbands, right? I don't have that kind of context here. All what I have, they observe what needs to be observed, what God asked to be observed when unseen. Another clarification when unseen by God is bima hafidallah. Allah is mentioned here. It is what God asks to be preserved or be guarded. So far, the verse described the ideal behavior of women, righteous women in the community. Now it's gonna move on to violators of laws, violators of rulings, and how to respond to that. It says, وَاللَّاتِي تَخَافُونَ نُشُوزَهُنَّ, those you fear their high-handedness, and nushuz is one of those words that in their semantical later development come to be understood as marital disobedience. Essentially, nushuz is marital disobedience. But nushuz here is not marital disobedience, it's high-handedness or disobedience even to the community. So I would say nushuz is only a subcategory of high-handedness or behaving in a way that no one expects you to behave in the community. To draw, an analogy or to compare it to another verse in the Quran, which is 128, وَإِنْ امْرَأَةٌ خَافَتْ مِنْ بَعْلِهَا نُشُوزًا أَوْ إِعْرَاضًا, if a woman fears from her husband nushuz, high-handedness, or i'rad, alienation, then the verse continues. So I argue that here nushuz is the general umbrella meaning. It's nushuz, marital in nushuz, only in 4:128 because of the context in 4:128. Because I have literally a woman fears from her husband. I have the word husband. I don't have that here. Another assurance that nushuz is as a Quranic term is general high-handedness, we find in 58:11. وَإِنْ قِيلَ لَكُمْ انشِزُوا فَانشِزُوا. If believers, if it's said to you, raise up or stand up when everyone else are sitting, which means a behavior that can be best described as different from everyone else. High-handedness, any behavior that is not considering the rest of the community. And then we have the three correction methods. It starts with فَعِظُهُنَّ. عِظُهُنَّ, reproach them, advise them, remind them of the teachings of God. And I take it probably maybe court warnings, congregation warnings, repeated warnings. We don't know how many times a criminal can be given warnings until they stop and before the court can escalate to something else. It escalates into اهجروهن في المضاجع, which is understood as leave them in their beds or ignore them in their beds, a metaphoric for withholding sex. Another crime, right? You don't communicate with your wife by withholding sex. So what can this stand for? First of all, I should say that the metaphoric interpretation of leaving them, and it's not beds, it's bedrooms. I'm gonna explain this in a minute. It stands for house arrest, arresting them in their bedrooms or in their homes, which used to be one bedroom, right? Or the place where they live in. Another reason it can never stand for withholding sex, because the metaphoric meaning of leave them in their bedrooms goes against the literal prohibition made in the Quran in 58:1-4 to something called al-zihar. Literal prohibition and the strict prohibition to zihar. And therefore I started, Hassan, by telling you that the traditional interpretation of 434 contradicts the rest of the Quran. What is zihar? Zihar is a pre-Islamic, and I know many of us know already this, but I'm explaining for those who maybe are puzzled by what is zihar. Zihar goes back to a pre-Islamic misogynist punishment in marriage. See, now we can see from where these ideas were coming, reviving pre-Islamic ideas, where a man will punish his wife by saying, I'm not attractive to you anymore. To me, you're كظهر أمي, zihar. You're like the back of my mother. How can a man, and the Quran literally ends the verbal announcement of the intention. A man, if he announces the intention of withholding sex this way, he can't go back to his wife and a husband and a wife until he sets a slave free or he fasts nonstop 2 months. Okay, a very severe punishment. Don't even say it. And the bigger question, Hassan, can the Quran recommend withholding sex in 434 and strictly prohibiting even using in a verbal way intimacy as a way to punish your wife? There's a huge contradiction here. And also I mentioned that اهجرهن في المضاجع. Madaji' is bedrooms and not bed. It's well known even for beginners in Arabic that this is ism makan, a noun place. And it's driven according to a special formula from the root, like sabaha, masbah, to swim, swimming pool. Madja' from daja'a, it's a place where you lay down. They took it as metaphoric for bed, but it's literal for house arrest in bedrooms. And now it escalates to udribuhunna, but even before going there, and maybe for the sake of time, I'm going to skip some points. Withholding sex, even, when it comes to human nature. I mean, seriously, men can punish their wives with withholding sex. We all know, except, of course, for some exceptions, that men are more sexually demanding. Women are more emotionally demanding. So I take it as a punishment. If someone will punish someone women can punish men, to be frank about it, by withholding sex. It can't be the opposite, right?
Well, and
Maybe.
to be frank about it, some women do that. Sorry to
And
say.
it's very mean when they do that, right?
I think
But
it's terrible. I'm speaking as a man. Yeah.
right. So it's not effective even speaking to basics about the human sexuality. Before leaving to Dribuhuna, what is the addressee here? Is it husbands? If we go to the preceding verse, which is 428, it's Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, community of believers. So the whole dialogue is not husbands. It's addressing the community with correction methods. Another assurance comes not only from the verse that comes before 434, it comes from 435, the following verse. وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ شِقَاقَ بَيْنِهِمَا, if you fear conflict, community between both of them, send an arbiter from his side and from her side again. And the question, Hassan, if the community of believers is the addressee in 429 and the addressee in 435, why to switch with no single mention of wives, husbands, or marriage to say, no, 434 is addressing husbands with 3 correction methods to deal with wives? And now beating. If the congregation, when nothing else works, allows beating, probably I would say this is recommended as a final solution. Now, the fact that we ruled out this option doesn't make it less Quranic, because again, it's not up to angry husbands to decide the punishments. It's up to courts, congregations, judges. They decide. I dream of the time not only we rule, away physical punishment, but to the time when we won't need prisons in the first place, when warnings can work with people, right? So it's up to the court. And this is another reason that motivates one to think of 434 as addressing criminal punishments, because of the intensity of how many times you can do it, right? When, right? How many times you repeat warning before you escalate to house arrest? It's up to the court. And it's way more safe when the court decides what to do than when you leave it up to angry husbands. Hey, go correct your wife the way you want. All of them will say, she was teasing me. All of them will say, no offense, not all of them. I mean, people who do that, like I take it.
I mean, it's probably pretty common. Yeah, I think it's
yeah. I mean, those who will, Go ahead, Hassan.
No. I was just going to say, in the situation where there's already some discord, perhaps, and it's come to a point where, I think.
I mean, it's too personal. Yeah, I mean, it's too sensitive, too personal to leave it to people to decide.
I agree.
But when you leave something with congregations, with courts, they can say no more beating, right? They can say we don't need prisons anymore. Warning is working for people. They can say I can give court warning for 10 times, 20 times before we escalate, right? And the Qur'an, by the way, is not there, especially with legal terms. The Qur'an switches to a very general language. For example, وَإِذَا حَكَمْتُمْ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ أَن تَحْكُمُوا بِالْعَدْلِ. If you rule people, seek justice. And the bigger question, what is justice, right? Qur'an is not there to tell you what is justice, right? It's human beings. The Qur'an, Islam, any religion is not there to replace the human responsibility of making sense of norms, rulings, their own life, right?
Dr. Hassan, this is a very, sorry to interrupt, this is a very, very profound point that you're making, which you also made earlier. You sort of alluded to this point that that the Quran isn't really interested in clear dispensations as to what needs to be done,
right?
In sort of as far as discipline and in disciplining people and punishing people. It's to be worked out in each age, right? Because the conditions are different in each age, the norms are different in each context, let alone in each age, and everything that you're saying, and what this point, not least of all,
Yeah.
Very profoundly
Let me stop sharing maybe, and I'll get back to you. So yeah, Hassan, as you mentioned, it's general enough to allow us to have our own voice and our own interpretation, but it's never related to marital context. It can never, with everything I mentioned, mean something like that. Whether as communities we want to go with that or not, it's another issue. Because again, if you rule, seek justice. What is justice? We decide what is justice. Justice 14 centuries ago is not justice like the meaning we understand by justice today, right? Maybe we add to all of these reasons, if we only, and this is now, I'm leaving my comfort zone with being only Quranic, even for those who seek guidance from the prophetic behavior, never ever was the prophet accused, even by his enemies, that he was in the habit of beating any of his wives. And the prophet is considered in the Quran as a role model. So either he should be really a role model and people follow him, and these are recommendations. So if he was commanded to do that, why not then? Another contradiction. The last point maybe I can add to this, and the full arguments are there in the book, is why is it recommended only to women violators of laws, right? And probably one of the reasons is house arrest at that time was more appropriate for women than to be taken somewhere else, away from their homes. Until today, you know, sometimes when people are like women sent prisons, they're subject to sexual harassments. Sometimes even when nothing happens, people attack their reputation to the rest of their lives. And it's no secret, Hassan, that in the Quran, priority is given to the elderly, the orphans, women, the less advantaged subcategories in the community. My students laugh when I tell them the Quran spoils women. Literally, the Quran spoils women. They're given priority.
That's amazing. That's an amazing perspective. I mean, I love that your students have that feeling that the Quran spoils women, which is a really refreshing perspective to, and everything you've described, not least your very profound analysis of verse 434. It's just so refreshing. All of this is very refreshing, very inspiring, very wise.
Thank you, Hassan.
Helpful.
And thank you for providing a platform to share.
It's my pleasure and honor. Really, this is very important, and everything that you've been describing is. And your book, you discuss other things in your book. Perhaps we don't. We'll save it for another time, hopefully. But it really speaks, as far as I'm concerned, to the necessity again of having providing, spaces like, in my humble way, a platform. Whatever, who am I? But like listening to women scholars, to women who are speaking on these issues, because really, I don't think men can come up with these insights. I mean, I'm sure they can if they really tried, but there's something to be said for our sort of unique positionalities. Like white people, to put it this way, like white people, for example, can't really speak to brown people's issues. Like they can empathize, but really, to be fair, like we need to hear from people of color, right? I mean, that's so. By the same token, if we want to be fair, and if we're not going to come across as stupid, we have many of these, I mean, it's terrible examples of it happens all the time, all too often, right? In Muslim contexts, sort of conferences dedicated to, talking about women's issues. Not a single woman speaker. Like, are you kidding?
Yeah, that's very sad. Yeah.
I mean, that's unbelievable. Are you crazy?
But this is changing, thanks to liberal intellectuals like you. This is changing now. I see a lot of, the narrative is changing. It's not like before. There is some resistance from time to time. You mentioned, with the like at the beginning of our conversation, like people try to double check the agendas. where those feminists are coming from, right? Is it Western agendas, against our even nationalism? Everything is already said. It's already in the Quran. Why to go back to all of that? But it's changing now. It's changing. Like I see a lot of positivity now in the field. Hopefully.
No, well, no, I think it's very important to be hopeful. Always, we should be hopeful. And I kind of say we should hope for the best and prepare for the worst, because we live in strange times today, but, and one has to always be hopeful, because, I mean, this is the perennial religious spiritual message of all the traditions, right? That we hope in, we hope in the mercy of God, and that good things will come. But speaking to people like yourself genuinely gives me hope. And again, it's really so refreshing. It's spiritually nourishing. It's spiritually rich. It's intellectually rich. And I mean, more people genuinely should know about your work. And again, I really thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything you're doing, everything you've been doing, and continuing to do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Hassan. It's been a pleasure and an honor to talk to you.
Oh,
and great job with your wonderful conversations. You know me, I'm a big fan. I'm going to continue, being with you and everything new you provide.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you for your huge contributions, like to all of us.
Oh, well, no, that's that really, thank you. That really means a lot. It's it's something I see it as one of my, as it were, my life's project. So it's an ongoing thing, and this will, inshallah, God willing, it will expand as time progresses. It's
inshallah.
But and I see it as it's not my project ultimately. It's who am I at the end of the day? It's something that has to be done, and there are other people doing this sort of thing. But anyway, I just feel genuinely a profound calling to sort of address some of these gaps. But yeah, let's continue to talk. Thank you again for your time, and
thank you so much. My pleasure. Thank you.